In this class, I'm going to explain the order in which one needs to catch exceptions. Okay. Let's say we have three exception classes: exception A, exception B, and exception C. And exception A basically extends the generic java.lang.exception. And then exception B, it inherits from exception A. So exception B extends exception A. And similarly, exception C extends exception B. So exception A is the root of all these three exceptions, and the child of exception A is exception B, and the child of exception C is exception C. Or you can say exception B is a derived class of exception A, and exception C is a derived class of exception B. And I have a program, a small demo program, in which all these three exceptions can potentially be thrown. So let's look at this program. This program basically invokes a method that can throw different exceptions based on the input. If the input is 1, it will throw exception A. If the input is 2, it will throw exception B. And if the input is 3, it will throw exception C. So let's run this program. So what it is doing is, when I call this method, it will check whether the input is 1. If the input is 1, then it calls a method that throws exception A and catches it right here. Okay. And if the input is 2, it will call a method that throws exception B, but it doesn't catch it here. So if the method is called and the exception that method throws is not caught here, it should be caught up the stack trace. So it should be caught by the method which invokes this. And who is invoking this? Our main program. So the main program needs to catch exception B and C, and doesn't need to catch exception A because this method itself catches exception A. It catches it and says caught exception A. But here it doesn't catch B and C. So the method which calls this method, that is the main method, should catch those exceptions, B and C. Okay. And all these three, what these three methods do is they just throw an object of exception A. This one throws an object of exception B. This one throws an object of exception C. They're just like dummy methods which are throwing those three exceptions. So let's run this program, and you'll see caught exception you get these three outputs: caught exception A, B, and C. So here we'll say caught exception A in method test method that throws exceptions. That way we'll know where it is coming from. Caught exception C in main. So the first one will not catch either of B and C because since the input is 1, it throws exception A, and this method itself catches that exception and handles it. So the idea is you should always catch an exception at the point where you can handle it and do something meaningful with it. If you cannot catch and do something meaningful with it, you should just let it go through, and the method which calls that method should probably handle it. Even if that method cannot handle it, the method which calls that, so you go up the stack trace and look at the method where you can actually gracefully handle it and show a meaningful error message. So this one will throw, for input 1, it will throw exception A, and it will be caught within this method itself. But for exception B and C, which are thrown for inputs 2 and 3 respectively, for input 2 you get exception B, so it will be caught over here, and for input 3 you get exception C, which will be caught here. So if I run this program again, it will say caught exception A in method this, caught exception B in main, caught exception C in main, right? Now I want to illustrate a small point. Here I always have exception C followed by B. Similarly, I have exception C followed by B, exception C followed by B. The order of these exceptions is very important. Let's say I change this to B here and C here, and say caught exception B here and caught exception C here. Now you get an error message. What is that error? Let's put our mouse on this cross sign here, and it says unreachable catch block for exception C. Unreachable means that code can never get executed. It is already handled by the catch block for exception B. The catch block for exception B is over here. It is saying that this block is already handled by the previous block where you are catching exception B. Why is it saying that? It is saying that because exception C inherits from exception B. When a class extends another class, there is what is called as an is-a relationship between the child class and the parent class. For example, if you have a shape class as a base class and a circle class as a derived class, then every circle is a shape. And let's say you have a square which also inherits from the shape. You can also say every square is a shape. But every shape is not a square, because a shape can be a circle. It can also be a rectangle. It can also be an oval. So that is-a relationship is only from the child class to the parent class. So every object of the child class is also an object of the parent class. So every circle is a shape. Every square is a shape. Every rectangle is a shape. But that's not true vice versa. That is, every shape is not a square. Every shape is not a circle. So what happens in this program is, since every exception C is a B, it will be caught here. So it can never come into this block. And that is why you get this error message which says unreachable catch block for exception C. It is already handled by the catch block for exception B, because every exception C is also an exception B. So our possibilities are either remove the catch clause or change back the order. So you should always catch an object of the most specific exception first. So the most specific exception is C, and the next one would be B. So the order in which you catch exceptions is the most specific exception should be caught first, and the most generic exception should be caught last. Okay, so this illustrates the order in which exceptions should be caught.